folks. I don't know if I'm ready to go live at the moment, but here we are, and I'm talking, so we'll just deal with that. I've got lots of thoughts going on in my head as usual, and I start about talking about autism is recognizing that every person that has autism is different, and you'd hope that that goes without saying, but I think the people that say a lot of that stuff are recognizing that the way that autism affects a person is markedly different for each person, and how it's experienced, the quirks that people see, the areas that other people might struggle in, it all varies. There is a similarity to everything, and they do say that if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. Yet there is a trend, there is an understanding that can take place. It is like saying, if you know someone from a certain culture or community group, you only know that one person. However, to be an aspect and part of that group, there are things that tie people together. And that's one of the things that people really struggle with and don't know how to identify, because traditionally the things that have been identified in the past are no longer what defines autism, especially across the genders. Many people have an understanding of what autism may look like in a young boy. They don't know what it looks like in an adult. They don't know what it looks like in a female. They don't know what it looks like to be twice exceptional. And they generally only have an understanding of the more severe side of it, mixed with complication of ID, which is intellectual disability as well. And that doesn't have to be the case. There are a lot of people that have autism that are not disabled intellectually, and there are another whole group that only have a learning disability or a developmental delay. Now, I wanted to give you my perspective on what autism can look like, what it might be, what my opinions are, and these are completely my opinions. They're not backed by arduous research and huge sample sizes. They're backed by my personal experience, and I don't know if my experience is larger than other people, yet I have had quite a lot of times in my life where people with autism are involved in my life and I'm involved in theirs, whether it be as a mum of kids with autism, whether it be as my occupation, where at one stage I was looking after people with autism and I studied it, whether it be having people within the family outside of my immediate family having autism, whether it be a large chunk of my friends end up having autism and tend to be neurodivergent instead of neurotypical. Then there's the aspect that because of the business that I run, I had another huge batch of clients that either had autism themselves and ADHD at times, or their children did. And this has given me quite a bit of exposure. A large number of my friends have autism, and people do come and talk to me because I have had a little bit of experience. And so over the years, my understanding has changed. And I have been involved with child psychiatrists, child psychologists, OTs, speechies, support workers, support coordinators, GPs, paediatricians, a huge range of allied health professionals, and I found that they may have some experience in certain aspects of it, but it wasn't their area of major work. And so I've had to gather information and keep working with them to siphon out their information and resources and help my children with it. And it's interesting, and it's also useful. So, what do I think autism is? I think it's many things, and it can sometimes not be seen and sometimes be seen. I think there is something not working in the section of the brain. So, and there is a deficiency in executive function. And for a few years, when people around me didn't understand it and I had to have them working with the children, I would explain to them, especially about the medication, that autism can sometimes be a reversal of how being tipsy works, tipsy with alcohol. And so you can be smart and all of this sort of stuff, and then you have a couple of drinks and people start saying, you're not so great doing this or that, and your capability is there and your potential is there, and yet your ability to make decisions is the bit where you start to struggle. If someone starts to have a deep conversation with you, you're like, this takes me longer to think about it. They don't get the subtle cues of social etiquette when it's going around. They definitely have issues with impulse control and having a filter on themselves and knowing what is the most appropriate thing or what's the not appropriate to be doing. They have a difference in how they perceive risk. They have a difference in what they're feeling. So suddenly they might think it's really great to go have a quick swim in the ocean, whereas everyone else is going, it's a little bit freezing. And it's not something that completely impairs them. However, there is a slowing down of this section, and the impulse control, the aggression, the extra happy, the sensory stuff, everything is changed. And it's that chemicals that are running through your brain at that point have been altered. Now, for my children and for a number of people that I have had a friendship with and worked alongside in terms of just being part of their lives or whatever, they've found that when they've taken autism, ADHD drugs, that there's almost this reversal of having the alcohol in your system. And it doesn't take away who they are, and it doesn't take away their spice or any of that. It just returns them to being sober, that they are able to go, my brain is clearer now. I can actually make this decision. I have quick reflexes, but also my brain has this quicker reflex. I can understand what's going on around me. I understand a little bit more of the social going around. And that's the thing. No matter who you are, if you are tipsy, you're different to the next tipsy person. And it's all completely based on your personality and who you are. And it brings out some extremes and dulls others and all of that sort of stuff. And some people won't become a really risky person with alcohol in their system, and other people will. And generally, they don't become a completely different person. And in the past, that has been a concern of many people. And they're kind of going, oh, you're just drugging your kids up, or I feel deadened, or whatever. Now, the drugs have changed, and sometimes when you see someone who is medicated for their autism or ADHD, you go, they don't act like everybody else. And yet, maybe they shouldn't. Maybe that is actually who they are, and you haven't dulled them or sedated them. It is just the fact that they have allowed their brain to actually have kind of this restful state where they're not buzzing all the time and they're reacting to the world as if they're sober. And for some people, they kind of go, oh, I don't know if I like that person, or they're just not the person I know. There is a case to be said that maybe that is the personality underneath everything, rather than a different person. And it might be that the medication isn't going to fix that person. It isn't about fixing. Autism is the way your brain works and the way you perceive the world and the way your body takes in information and puts out information. So if you look at some of my children, one of my children has a huge fear of the world, and that is because he can't understand the risks of the world. And so if you can't assess risks, then suddenly the whole world is dangerous to you, because you have to eventually err on the side of just going out and not caring, or the world is full of risks that I don't know what's going in, and I'm walking through a wood with a blindfold, a forest with blindfolds on, and if the more severe case, you may also have earmuffs on. So all of this information that other people are getting and processing and being able to understand isn't getting through. And so when we give my son medication, for him, he's able to make sense of this world more. He's able to make the connections in his frontal lobe and say, oh, I get it a bit. And he is still a fearful person, and that might take time. He still has trouble with learning. He still has trouble with language. He still doesn't want to talk to other humans. And that is an interesting part of who he is. It is a very common aspect of autism, and yet it is part of who he is. I have 4 children with autism, and each of the children are vastly different, and it does affect them differently, but for the same reasons. So Mississippi, she doesn't see risk, and she doesn't interpret it, and so will do things that are insanely dangerous. And without supervision, it was a minefield being her mum, because you didn't know what she was going to do. You could guess, and you could walk into a new environment and you could say to her, here are your boundaries, but you didn't know how she was going to interact with that environment. I'd walk into a tennis court, and this happened to me many years ago. We went to visit a friend of my son's, and they live in an estate, so that all the houses have a few different things like a pool and a tennis court and that sort of thing. And they had so we went on the tennis courts to hit a few balls, and I was talking to the mum of the child and trying to just establish that relationship, and really kind of, it can take a lot of work when your children has autism for the other parents to accept that playdates are okay and things are good, and understand why a child is acting a certain way and see them for who they are rather than for just the autism. I turned around, and Mississippi was literally at the top of the tennis court fence. Now, she would have been 7, maybe 8. I can't actually really recall. I hadn't anticipated when I walked into that I would have to say to this child, do not scale this fence all the way to the top and do it really fast. But because I hadn't, she did not know that that was not an okay thing to do. And I said, if you run through what happens if this happens? No, that's not going to happen. What happens if, no? And she couldn't make these decisions with wisdom. And she just thought things and did them because her impulse control was really low. So it was a matter of, I can have this idea, I want to do it. And on top of that, she then has these recurring thoughts of, I'd really like to do this, I'd like to do this, I'd like to do this, I'd like to do this, until she does it. Now, when we walk into a situation, I would say, okay, we are not leaving this boundary. You can't go out of, let's say, the tennis court gates. I don't want you going I would say, removing the posts for the tennis court nets. I don't want you climbing the fence. I would like to make sure that when you hit the ball, it will not hit anybody on the torso or the head. You cannot swing a bat with anyone within a meter of you. And if you get angry while you're here, you need to come to me. What else might I have said? Just as a blind situation walking in. I probably would have mentioned something along the lines of, we are within a residential area and you must keep your screens to a certain level as well. But other than that, I would have to be watching and seeing where she's going to go with it, because I really don't know. And it provides a fun life, and it means that she does things that other kids won't do, and she'll try things when you say, you can trust me, it's okay. And she did it. It meant that she didn't follow the crowd. There were so many benefits to the way she saw the world. Now, giving her medication allowed her to curb that impulse for that split second where she goes, I'm going to do this, and there was no in-between time between, I'm going to do this and I'm doing it. Whereas as you get older, quite frequently you learn those skills, and yet she didn't have that. She also was able to process risks and problem solving and concepts that she had not been actively taught about a new situation. And so she was able to go, maybe I should do this or that. Now, there were times that she buried herself alive, including her face. Now, she was old when she did this, and even after the fact, she was not able to be convinced that it was not a good idea. And these are just some of the things that you had to deal with. And so both of them are people that cannot assess risk. And yet it comes out very differently because of the personality. And you find that both because of the way culture and community treats girls, and also the way that the girls' brains grow in childhood, because we know that children's brains grow differently for girls and boys. Girls become a little bit more cluey and understanding and more mature, younger, and boys go through different stages, and they are driven by different things. And puberty hits at different stages. They have different types of hormones that are hit at different ages. All of this 100% changes the way all of this works. And so you find that a person with an autism, one, they do develop later. All of these milestones are not hit at the same age as everyone else. Now, I found that to be a pleasure. It's not great at all times, but my children stay children in an age where that doesn't happen very often for much longer than their peers. They found joy in life where others were stressing about what clothes they needed to wear and what makeup and whether they look cool in front of their friends. I have a 15-year-old that is turning 16 in a month and a half. 2 days ago was the first time she went, oh, I don't think I want to hold hands today in front of my school and in front of all my peers. And that has been a long time coming. And I celebrate these milestones of that awkwardness of looking cool in front of mum and all of that. Because one, it is beautiful that my children love on me so much and have that absolute joy and happiness of seeing me, and they're not embarrassed by me like a 5-6-year-old, and they absolutely adore their mum. It is a milestone that they need to hit to actually achieve autonomy as an adult. And I enjoy that it's later, and I celebrate that it happens as well. And at the time I said, hey, this is so cool that you hit that. And she had hit that because she said, if I do that, I'm going to get bullied. And that was a bit sad that was her reality. However, it was also, you could see it, a transition of independence. And she said, I'd rather just link arms rather than walk down holding hands because people tease me too much already. And that's really cool. But as I said, it's lovely having kids that can be kids and follow that lovely tradition of children being children and looking at things through children's eyes. We could go and have fun at the park. We could just hang out together and be silly. And that wasn't gone in a blink of an eye for us. But it did mean that a lot of things were delayed. My kids didn't understand when their peers would hit the kind of, oh, everyone's getting boyfriends and it's really cool and I'm going to be giggly and all of that sort of stuff. They'd come to me and go, I don't get it. Why are people like this? Why are they acting like this? They're being silly. It doesn't make sense, because a lot of the stuff didn't. When you hit kind of a 10, 11-year-old, hormones do take over and they act differently. And the social things come into play, and it's, why can't I be friends with my male friend if it's my daughter talking, and it just be okay and nobody ask anything about it? Why does it have to be called my boyfriend when all we're doing is just acting like best friends? And it was great to be able to have those conversations, and we have an openness in our family that is awesome, like something that I value so, so much. But that's what it looks like. There is a delay, and because everything has to be learnt and discussed and worked through. There's no kind of intuitive learning. And so you can have the most amazing child. And an example I used yesterday was my son. He is amazingly smart, and he understands things about maths and patterns, and people kind of get that idea of Rain Man about him and that sort of thing, because he's very quirky socially. He won't talk to people, he won't touch people, he won't look at people. He doesn't want to have a bar of most people. And he's in school, and he hasn't been taught how to use a calculator to the level that he needs. And he doesn't want to learn a calculator because it's also change and all of that sort of stuff. So he's doing maths well above his grade. And yet each day he gets challenged that you did not use your calculator. You need to do your, and he goes, no, I can't use my calculator, but here's the answer. And he'll do it, and there it is on the piece of paper with the correct answer, and he's able to do it. So the child that can't learn how to use a calculator, or can't learn to easily blow his nose, or learn how to chew food, knowing to swap the food from one side of the mouth to the other, and all of that thing, and so he just swallows things whole half the time, and it can't be given chewy food. that doesn't kind of fall apart in his mouth. He also then will turn around and solve all the answers that they're meant to be doing on the calculator in a high school level. It does fly against what people understand of human intellect, and that is really interesting for me, at least. And when you have to learn things from scratch and really thoroughly understand every single thing about your life, it changes who you are on top of everything else. And so I have a child who doesn't understand English very well, and yet learns Italian just as fast as he's learning anything else. He can't speak English very well, and he learns Italian. And my understanding about that is because both of them are second languages to him. Both of them are not this intuitive learning. So it doesn't matter what he's learning. He doesn't read the same way other people do. He doesn't look at the word and see it phonetically. He can't do that. If you give him a brand new word, it's a huge struggle, and most of the time he won't be able to read it. If you look at a word somewhere in your environment, we automatically interpret what that word means. Our brain just does it. And he sees lines and squiggles and dots, and he doesn't put it all together. And if you then force him to go back and process what it means, he can get there and he knows the word. But his brain doesn't automatically read. His brain doesn't automatically do English. And so he's able to memorize things at an amazing rate because he's had to. He's had to memorize the English language by look. And it wasn't until COVID, when I was teaching him at home, that I realized how much he'd gone under the radar. Because when you've got a class of 26, 28 kids, you aren't able to recognize that that child can't read, but he can actually understand the sentence that I've put down in front of him because he has memorized every single word. And it isn't until you're sitting down with him one-on-one that things start to fall into place very quickly. Now, I also had the advantage of the fact that as a child, I used to sit with my sister and try and help her to read. Now, she can't read and she'll never be able to read because she has an intellectual disability and quite a severe one. And yet, it was one of the things that we used to do with her is teach her some standard words. And so she learned how to rote recognize certain things. She could recognize her name. And then at one stage, someone didn't correct how to write her name for her. And so she took a letter out of her name and she never put it back in. So for the rest of her life, she was missing a vowel out of her name, which is quite important with a signature. But it doesn't matter who you are, people still expect you to sign. And it's just part of today's world. And so her signature no longer had an A in her name. And so I recognized her ability and his ability of rote learning rather than reading. And so what did it for me that made me just go, yep, I know what's going on here, that other people missed, was I had my child reading something out to me, and because I knew he had just memorized the entire book, and that's what he used to do. He'd have these little small books from kind of year kindy, year one, and they'd say, oh, can you read it? And he'd read it out to them. And I looked at him and I said, you've memorized that book. You could do that with your eyes closed. And he said, yes. And he thinks that's normal. But one day he read the word tree as the word bush. And they don't look the same. Then they're nowhere near each other except they've got the same meaning. And the second he did that, I went, I know what you've done. And you've coded every single word in, and you've memorized it. And so when people say, can you read this sentence? And you read it out to them, you can. Which makes it really difficult for him with names because they don't come around as often and they're not written down as often and seen. And just isn't the repetition there. And so names can be an issue. But that's one aspect of how I experience autism in my children and in those around me. And it might help you to be able to interact with others in your world, because there is a lot of people with autism. And I'd love to talk about later how it looks in girls, because that's a whole new ball game. And I don't want to make this too long. So I'll stop this here. And when I get chatty, probably another 10 minutes, I'll come back and have another chat. God bless. Love someone out there, and ta-ra.